Philip McKenzie for quite a bit of time. So you're going to have an amazing moment for those two joining forces to talking about what does it really take to reimagine the future. So I want to welcome Jenny Anderson, and she's a creative strategist from Reactivate the Future, and also Philip McKenzie, who's a cultural anthropologist. So welcome to you, Philip. So great to see you. How are you?
Thank you. It's good to see you too. It's been way too long.
It's been way too long. You know, I wish obviously that we could have a real coffee, but until then we can have virtual coffee.
Exactly.
And while we're waiting on Jenny, I just want to remind everybody that please keep this interactive. So if you have questions to Philip, Jenny, obviously use the hashtag. And there we have you, Jenny. Welcome online. So happy to see you. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. How about you? Lovely to see you both.
Yes,
and to see Philip early in the morning in New York.
I made it.
Exactly. Both of you, you look wonderful. I can't wait to hear your always insightful thoughts about how we reimagine the future, because I do think that COVID-19, this challenging time, might be just the ripe, opportune moment to do that. So to the stage, Philip and Jenny, the virtual stage is yours. Welcome and enjoy.
Thank you.
Welcome.
So good to see you. Good morning.
And I always try, Philip, to do a little bit of Turkish in the beginning, but I'm never sure if, in fact, it's any good at all, and whether people can understand me or not.
Well, I'm not even going to attempt it.
It's great to be back with the Sustainable Brands Turkey community again. Philip and I, we're talking to you today about how to reimagine the future. So Philip, shall I go first to let you have an extra cup of coffee in New York?
I'll let you jump into it. And I'll follow you gracefully.
Okay. So when I think about reimagining the future, I come back first to the present, because there isn't really a future. Not really. We only create the future by what we do today, by everything we do today. So what is our role as a group, as sustainability practitioners, as HR managers, as leaders of our organization? What's our role in respect of the future? And I see it as this: to heal the story of separation. What do I mean by that? I see the story of separation as the root cause of our current existential and human crisis, and it has clear strands to it. So firstly, the story of separation is between humanity, us, and nature, and that is at the root of our current ecological crisis. So we've seen nature as separate from ourselves, something that is ours, as a resource to plunder and to use for our benefit, without recognizing that we as humans, we're made from the very same atoms and molecules as everything else that lives on our living planetary system. So that's a way of thinking that is as old as many of our major religions, and thinking that really took hold in the scientific and industrial revolutions of several hundred years ago, where we began to break things down to understand them and start treating everything in life as a separate entity, like machines, like cogs in a wheel. So secondly, the story of separation is between humans and humans. And it's all the things we have constructed to keep us apart, to differentiate us, that have given rise to so much polarization and hate that we see in the world. And that's things like race, religion, language, gender, even nationality, because nationality is a construct. We're all humans. I may be British, Philip may be American, but we're all humans. And that's not to say that difference is wrong, but if it's used to breed division and polarization, binary thinking, you're wrong, I'm right, we have a lot of misery in the world. And that includes the story of separation between masculine and feminine, where for thousands of years we've designed our societies to suppress not women as a gender, just as a gender, but the feminine qualities such as compassion, love, empathy, understanding, in favor of the masculine qualities of rational thinking, goal orientation, a bias for action. And finally, in two other areas, I think, how we've prioritized our outer lives over our inner lives. So simply put, how we appear to others rather than on our internal self-development, prioritizing empirical knowledge rather than more intuitive ways of knowing, and prioritizing the qualities of our left brain, which works on structure, order, polarities, binary thinking, instead of balancing those with the qualities of our right brain hemisphere, which creativity, imagination, it's systemic, it sees in wholes, all of the things that are really important when we're solving complex challenges. So what can we as sustainability or HR or CEOs do to help us imagine the future? I think it's these things. Go beyond sustainability and circular economy practice to regenerative practice when it comes to the impact you have on the planetary ecology. Don't just ask, how can I reduce my impact? But also ask, how can I regenerate the depleted resources of planet Earth? What products and services can I imagine, can I design to do that? Design with a living systems mentality that takes into account how you can create healthy, regenerative, evolutionary organizations that work in the way that nature does. So investigate things like living systems and biomimicry, and go beyond HR and diversity and inclusion to adopt a regenerative approach to human development, to renew and to regenerate the potential of each person who works for you, each organization that works with you, and all of the people, the customers and consumers whose lives you impact. So look for an idea that is bigger than yourself to get behind, not a purpose, but a planetary mission to get behind that is bigger than your own organization, where you develop regenerative leaders who are leaders of themselves, who have autonomy, creativity, self-organization, self-determination, who have the kind of critical thinking capacity and decision-making capacity for a complex world. So people who don't need to be told in a hierarchy what to do, who don't rely on empirical studies alone, but also have a sense of right relations with the world and go beyond the known to the unknown. So incorporate radical experimentation in your organization in safe containers that don't threaten your business, but that release creativity and innovation, and allow people to become comfortable working with uncertainty. Work with scenario planning, imagine different paths on which the future might develop, and design for those. So that's kind of it for me. I'm going to hand over to Philip now to give you his view of imagining the future, and then we're going to have a little chat about what each other has had to say.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I always want to start off with a moment of gratitude. I want to thank the Sustainable Brands Turkey team for inviting me from New York to participate today. They've always filled with such inspiration and such prompts. So thank you, Jenny. Thanks, Thomas, prior to us taking the virtual stage. It's interesting to reflect that a year ago, around the same time, I'd already spent about 2 to 3 weeks in Turkey. I'd left from Istanbul to go to Moscow, and then gone from Moscow to Denver, all in the course of 3 to 4 weeks. And obviously now we're living in complete different environments, completely different ways of being. But that has still, in this moment, afforded us an incredible opportunity to coalesce together, to gather together, to capture the intent behind some of these issues. And so obviously We're here to talk about reimagining the future. We're here to talk about redesigning the good life. And I want to start off with one quick quote from Buckminster Fuller to kind of set a little bit of the stage right now, that basically we are called to be the architects of our future, not to be its victims. And when we think about the future, it's always this moment out in the past, something that we can perhaps kick the can down the road to get to. And I think, Jenny, as you so eloquently put it, the future is actually now, in the moments that we're living, in the choices that we're making at each step of the way. So instead of a reimagining, what I would like to spend just a little bit of time on before we chat with one another is to imagine rather than reimagine, to design rather than redesign, because we need to make a break from the moments that came before us, the stories that we've told ourselves, these industrial age stories that emphasize the separation that you mentioned, and really start to imagine a new reality, a new story, new possibilities, without taking this moment of break and separation. Will only actually be, if we're going to be doing a in there, we'll be re-emphasizing what we've already done. And that needs to be clearly set aside. What I like to do in this moment is to think about actually some of the comments that I made last year when I was fortunate enough to make my first trip to Istanbul, where we all met, ironically, and talk about imagining a new social contract. The social contract that we've had in the past was, again, one attached to the industrial age values of that time. What we need is a social contract that is capable of embracing, real values that will have meaning to us. They're the values of justice. There's no capacity to build and structure without a social contract that's grounded in the ideas of justice, compassion, joy, and love, and not in a concept of the way in which we brand these terms. Joy does not mean lack of struggle. And I think any of us who have been dealing with the effects of COVID-19 globally, social unrest here in the United States, social division, Black Lives Matter movement that has transcended the cultural and historical norms of the United States and has made its mark globally. We must find a way to coalesce around these ideas, but also find joy in that struggle, which is a very distinct idea and notion from that of happiness, which is something that's very brand focused. As part of that conversation, I think we also have to say to ourselves, what must we resist beyond what we must embrace? The social contract is what we must be embracing. But I think we also need to resist some things as well. We need to resist normal. Normal has been built on extraction. Normal has been built on exploitation. We can't no longer think about business as normal, business as usual. These are our ideas and terms that we must resist. We have to resist cynicism. It's easy when you're dealing in spaces like this to become disillusioned, to, as you think about the future, to think about it in these ideas that tend to lean toward the dystopian. The dystopian actually becomes easy. We can already imagine the worst outcomes. Now it's time for us to imagine better outcomes. That's where the work comes in. And finally, I'll leave out on two other thoughts before we can kind of open it up. Hopelessness, tied to cynicism, but somewhat different. Hopelessness is a function of despair. So it's actually a step above cynicism, because cynicism is an operating system. It's part of what makes us feel that we can't enact change, that we can't be instruments. It makes us far more inclined to operate as devil's advocates rather than as our better angels. So we need to definitely think about how to flip that relationship. And I'm going to go out on one last quote about imagination. And I took everything handheld, so I'm reading a few notes as I go along with this. And this is from Adrienne Marie Brown, a woman, a strategist, a thinker, unparalleled new thinker, and someone I'll actually be getting an opportunity to interview very soon for my show. But nonetheless, one of her lines that I've been really thinking about a lot is this idea of imagination and she says, "We're living now inside the imagination of people who thought economic disparity and environmental destruction were acceptable costs for their power. It is our right and responsibility to write ourselves into the future. So that social contract, those that were written far before us, it's now time for us to write ourselves into the future with a new social contract." So I'll leave it there, and we can have a bit of a conversation from this point while keeping an eye on time.
I just want to check in with the Sustainable Brands team because the clock is telling us 13 minutes, but it only started when Philip started to speak. So I'm kind of hoping that we're still on track with that clock. So Philip, you said brought up something really important there that I think is often in the minds of leaders of brands, which is about power, healthy power versus unhealthy power. And living in the imaginations of people who thought that economic disparity and ecological destruction was an okay price to pay for their power. And many of our organizations have been built on those designs.
Yes.
So we now have what we would, in those old terms, describe as very successful brands and successful organizations who now face considerable change. So I imagine they often ask themselves, so where do we begin?
Yeah.
Do you have any
the beginning
views on that from a perspective of power?
Yeah, the beginning is the hardest part, right? It's like waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning in my case, right? The beginning is the hardest part. But what I'll offer is that this is going to be hard. And the power relationships, whether or not you want to do it, they're going to change regardless. I can only speak about a context. Well, I can't only, but I will only speak about the context of the United States. You can see that the cracks are becoming fissures, as I started writing about at the beginning of COVID-19. The complexity that you highlighted, that's all of these things are going to happen. I'm living in a reality now. New York is doing better during the pandemic, but the West Coast is literally on fire here in the United States. So even if we're going to operate from a traditional model of thinking about cost versus reward, which is a power-based relationship, the cost of continuing on the road that we are on is much higher than the cost of doing something different. Our accounting is broken, and I'm a finance person, so even if I was sitting here talking to an accountant or another former trader, the reality is that relationship, the way in which we've thought about our cost is not grounded in a reality. It's not grounded in a sustainable system in the first place. And that system will change whether you are or not. It's dependent on whether we want to be thriving in it or drowning in it.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. And I think one of the things that my colleague Laura Storm and I, we set up an online program for people during COVID-19 who really wanted to explore what change looked like called the Regenerators Journey. And one of the things that we talk about on it in the face of that, where do I begin? Where do we start? You know, we have sustainability strategies in place, but you're talking regenerative. We have people development strategies in place, but you're talking about something different. Is an interesting chap, and I think everybody can look him up online, called Jaime Lerner, who was the mayor of a city called Curitiba. And one of the approaches that he took to completely changing the experience of people who lived in his city from a very degenerative experience with poor housing, poor water supplies, poor sanitation, high air pollution. He took the approach of being an ecosystemic acupuncturist, which I really quite like if I was the CEO or if I were a sustainability director, to actually think about my organization like a map of a city. And he literally took a map of the city and some acupuncture needles and started to look at all of the different places where he could make a start, even if it was something as simple as a park bench. Even if it was something grander, like, okay, we need more water running through the city here, or we need more carbon capturing trees to create a better sense of air quality. And then gradually, over a period of time, he has become quite iconic. So I think there is an interesting approach that you could take. And I'm sort of thinking about the qualities you talked about, like justice, for example, is how would an organization think as an acupuncturist about justice, for example?
Yeah, justice is foundational, because we have this idea, again, justice is blind, right? There's a lot of these statues that we've all seen of the blindfolded woman with scales, implying that justice is blind, and also invoking the feminine, which I think is very important, and something that you mentioned, this idea of feminine values. So there's a lot of iconography attached to these images and why we think about them, which is kind of really the culture piece. But obviously, yes, justice has to be foundational, because justice is one of the ways in which we have defined the rules. It tells us, it gives us boundaries and limits, and it implies that those boundaries and limits are filled with ethical weight. And I use John Rawls a lot, because he has this theory of justice that's grounded in what he calls the veil of ignorance. That if you didn't know where you would fall on the scale, right? If you didn't know what the rules are, so you can't say, well, it's better to be able-bodied, or it's better to, be white, or it's better to be black, or it's better to be a woman, or it's better to be a man. If you didn't have the benefits of being into the system already, so you're operating with the veil of ignorance, what would you build? And I think, obviously, when you think about it from a gaming perspective, if you don't know where you're going to be advantaged, you'd build a system with the most advantages for everybody. And I found that to be so profound as a very fundamental way of thinking about justice, because it automatically makes you inclusive. You don't have time to think about what you're taking away from other people and how to use that as an exchange of power. You have to think about how to make it as inclusive and as broad as possible. So I think before you have any conversation about what the future is going to look like, it has to be based in justice, because that's how we define and start to systemically create winners and losers beyond the ethics of that moment. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I work a lot with Kate Raworth's donut economics model, particularly when working with place. Actually, I tested it out on Istanbul last year, which was interesting. And And actually, for all the component parts, it really comes down to 4 questions, I think, that a city or an organization or a department can ask itself, which come down to: how do I design this organization so that all people in it can thrive? And thinking about what is that thrivability? How do I design this organization so that it makes no negative impact on our ecology around us, and a positive one? And then taking that out into the wider world, how do I make sure that I design this organization so that it doesn't impact people negatively anywhere around the world, not just in my organization, but positively? And how do I make sure my organization does not impact the planetary ecology negatively anywhere in the world? Those 4 fundamental principles, I think, encompass justice for people and justice for all living things on the planet. It makes it almost impossible to not think about what is my impact on forestry if I'm a Kia making furniture? What is my impact on rivers if I'm producing food and extracting water or allowing agricultural runoff? And that seems to me to be a model that is gaining interest and traction, both from place and from an organizational perspective, to address those imbalances of justice, power, that are fundamental to the design in which we live today, and the design that we don't want in the future.
Absolutely. I was fortunate last week to interview a gentleman who works for Donut Economics. He's one of their community folks. So shout out to Rob Shorter.
Oh yeah.
And also Rob Hopkins, because we were doing a interview talking about some stuff. Actually, imagination was a big part of it, and I think these ideas are critical, because they're expanding the way in which we think. They're broadening the scope of what is actually possible, and there isn't just one way. I think there could be many ways. Of course, having models like Donut Economics that can be applicable to other types of environments is great. We can start to think about a scale that is one-to-one, rather than taking models and transferring them and using them as you demonstrated that you did in Istanbul. That's different from the typical scale advice that we think about, or the scale mantras that are so much a part of business. I think we're getting a prompt as well.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that we're on time, so I'm going to leave it there for now, so we can take any other questions or thoughts from the audience, or if Thomas wants to jump back in. I'm keeping an eye on all the screens.
Here. One good question here.
Thank you so much.
Good advice on how to reimagine the future.
Exactly. So thank you so much, Jenny and Philip, for always sharing those insights, and absolutely love that conversation. I think that is exactly what we sometimes miss by not being together. So I'm so happy that we could do this virtually as well. I just wanted to ask both of you just to answer this one simple question, which is really for people who sit out there and want to reimagine the future. Do you have, each one of you, one piece of good advice? One piece of good advice for people who want to start on how to reimagine the future.
Yeah, don't wait for the future to happen, because the future's here today. So get moving now. What you do today is what creates the future.
Great. Great advice, Jenny.
I would say very quickly, find each other, right? Like, these are moments where we can connect but we just need to connect more deeply. So whatever notion you think you might be having, there's somebody else out there who has that same notion. There's no such thing as an original idea, an original thought. Find each other and build in solidarity, which is distinct from being allies. I know we throw that word ally around a lot, but we need to find each other and build in solidarity. So that would be my advice very quickly.
Very great advice. Philip, Jen, can't wait to catch up with you very soon somewhere in the world. Thank you so much for joining us, and powerful advice from both of you. And obviously collaboration, Sustainable Development Goal 17 is definitely one thing that we all need to learn how to do and become allies. So thank you so much for joining this little session.
Thank you.
And
thank you, Sustainable Brands, Thomas. See you again soon.
See you all soon. And let's keep up the